Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our first session within the online animal handling webinar series. My name is Jenny Ivey. I'm an assistant professor in the animal science department at the University of Tennessee, and also function as the state's equine extension specialist. We've got several panelists and our main speaker on with us today, and so I'll take a second to just introduce them to you. But Kevin Thompson and Jenny Goodrich and I have been working to get this series started for a few years now, and we're excited to be able to offer it even in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic in this online form. And so Kevin Thompson will be visiting with us today and talking about his over 30 years experience in training and handling and managing livestock in a low stress manner, and be able to utilize this particular webinar to set the stage for the following 2 weeks. So remember, we do have a separate section next Tuesday, the 16th, and then again on the 23rd, where we'll go a little bit more in depth about how to maneuver cattle and be able to work cattle on horseback, utilizing some of these concepts that Kevin will talk about today. I mentioned Jenny Goodrich earlier. She's another one of our panelists. She is a county director in Morgan County over in the eastern region of Tennessee, and has an extensive background in working with beginning farmer veterans and the veterans throughout our state in helping them be more successful in their agricultural endeavors. Also with us is Ashley Savage from the Middle Tennessee Research and Education Center, Kelly Melvin, who is my graduate student in the Animal Science Department pursuing her master's degree, and Lacey Johnston, who is our University of Tennessee equine lecturer. So they'll be helping us field the questions in the chat section. And so if you do look down, you have a Q&A option within the webinar feature. And so you can utilize that to ask questions to the panelists throughout the course of the webinar, and we'll be monitoring those and saving the ones that are appropriate for us to use towards the end for our Q&A section. Also, I'll go ahead and launch this poll really quickly. We'd like to know a little bit more about the participants and how you each work with horses and cattle within your own operations. And so if you don't mind to take a few minutes and just click through those as Kevin introduces himself and talks a little bit about the research station there and what he'll be presenting with us today. I'll turn it over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Dr. Ivey, and thank you, Jenny Goodrich, for giving me the opportunity to be a participant in today's program. And over the next 3 weeks, I truly look forward to it. I truly enjoy the opportunity anytime I have to share the way that I grew up learning from a grandfather and a father and other people in my career on how to handle cattle in a way that there really is an optimal way. That brings less stress to them. And we're going to share throughout this presentation why that is and the positive impacts it can have on our operations. But I'd like to just start out by giving just a little overview of myself and what I do on a daily basis. I work for the University of Tennessee. I'm the director of the Middle Tennessee Research and Education Center here in Spring Hill, and our facility just south of here in Lewisburg, Tennessee. We've got 1,265 acres here in Spring Hill and 615 acres that we manage in Lewisburg. We do a lot of research hopefully that can positively impact your operation as a producer, be it an equine owner, breeder, enthusiast, or beef cattle operator, or if you're in the row crop side of things and have horses and cattle. We do work, really, we mimic all things agriculture across the state of Tennessee, from fruits and vegetables to our commodity crops like soybean, corn, wheat, and rye. Also, we have a producing dairy here. We milk 130 cows each and every day, twice a day. And we have a commercial cow-calf operation that we do a tremendous amount of reproductive related work. A lot of work coming up. We have a great proposal out to do some low stress work and how it ultimately impacts cattle once they go on and are harvested and put onto the retail side for our consumers. We also house the state central bull testing facility here. And one of the things that I am most proud of that I get to work with Dr. Ivey, we are the only research and education center in the system, and there's 10 of them located across this great state of ours, that has an equine program. And we truly, truly do enjoy working with Dr. Ivy and her expertise. And I would say this before we get started today, that I'm truly not what you would consider a typical horse trainer. I'm a beef cattle producer that was raised in the beef cattle industry, multiple generations in the industry. But I was raised and understand the importance of using horses to manage beef cattle, all classes of beef cattle, from the feedlot environment to the cow-calf environment, working baby calves, all the way up through the weaning, stocker, and background programs. And the importance that it is, because we can ultimately manage the level of stress and do a better job and positively impact those economically important traits that we're looking at. So what that does, that gives me a really unique perspective on how to truly train and work with a horse and bring out the best things in that horse to make it a very useful horse, and what I like to call a happy horse, because a happy horse is a horse that has purpose. It has direction in its life. It stands at the gate and wants to actually greet you and be caught and go out that gate and have a saddle put on it, because it knows it gets to go work that day. But most importantly, it helps develop a safe horse that is a true partner. So we're going to talk about a lot of that over the next 3 weeks through some different formats. And so Dr. Ivy, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the presentation unless you have anything else you need to add.
That's perfect. Thanks, Kevin.
All right, so here we go. And first of all, I truly would like to apologize because I do a lot of these actually in real time. So whether it be a large arena in Williamson County or down in Georgia or wherever, lots of times I have the opportunity to actually be on a live horse instead of my office chair here today. And I actually have cattle out in that arena, or I've done several of these on farm. That's my preferred way because it's truly a natural environment. So I apologize that you're not out here on the research center today getting to interact with us. And we'll get back to that before long. We get this coronavirus under control, and we look forward to having interaction with you guys out here so we can do some of these in hand. But again, I enjoy the opportunity to share what I know, and I would like to state that the most important thing I hope you gather from this today is that I want to present this in a very humble manner, and for you to know that I do not have all the answers. I do not do all things correctly. That's the philosophy I try to live my life, because I think that's the true and active philosophy of a stockman or a stock person. We understand that we need to continue to learn each and every day by the visual interactions we have with cattle, with horses, and most importantly, with people. And so today, basically, I want you to think of this as a very purposeful discussion. Just like if you and I were sitting in the same room, let's just have a discussion. And you have the opportunity to ask some questions that we can answer later. And so I just want you to kind of view this as a discussion. But really, the first and foremost thing that we really want to cover today is stress, how we can actively reduce that stress in really two factors. And first, the handler ourselves, and also the animal, and how those two things are tied together. Okay, the reason that we do desire to reduce stress, and I think it's important that we really identify the reason for this. It's just not because it's something that we think's cool and we want to do that. We want to do it because it adds a level of safety. And as each and every one of you know that are horse owners and beef cattle owners, we are in a very unique industry. There's no other industry in this world that we have the fortune and the opportunity to live for a period of time in that involves the entire family in the working aspect of production in that operation. So we have young people, and I was one of those when I was 4 years old on a horse or on a tractor working alongside a grandfather that was in his 70s. I didn't have the fortune to work with my great-grandfather, but many people do. So they're actually working with folks that are in their 80s or even their 90s. So the operations that we're in, the activities that we take great joy and excitement in interacting with our family are actually is a working environment. So safety is so very important. And we see the majority of the accidents that are either, disabling or even fatal occur to those folks that are under, the age of, I think, and I apologize, I don't have my statistics in front of me, but under the age of 15. And then the next highest percentage are those that are above the age of 65. So everything we do, we should do with a purpose to reduce stress. And if we reduce stress, that allows things to happen in a slower environment that is safer for both us and the animal. And then the next thing to realize is, and I want to talk about a lot of this today, because there's an additive effect to the way that we act upon the way that the horse acts and the way that the cattle act. And also, one of the things that I like to always start off with, and I know we don't have you able to raise your hand, I wish we did, but maybe you could put some comments in there a little bit later. So if we're stressed, we tend to over-vocalize, right? And if we over-vocalize, as a family unit, those closest to us usually get the brunt of that over-vocalization, right? So what I usually ask before I begin taking my horse out and doing some demonstrative things with the livestock is I ask how many wives in this audience have been hollered at by their husbands whenever they're working cattle. All right, just about every wife will raise their hand. I'll turn it around and say, how many husbands, see there, we got a hand raised, that's awesome. So how many husbands have been hollered at by their wives? So we get hands raised there. But most often I will ask, how many of you children in here get hollered at by your father when you're working cattle? And they'll kind of look around and they'll look at me and they'll raise their hand. So it's something that we all live in families, and we know that families love each other. And that's part of understanding relationships. We tend to holler at those that are closest to us. And for some reason, working cattle and working with horses can sometimes bring out a little anger that's translated to those that we love the most. So if we can understand how to control stress, we can ultimately impact positively our family dynamics and family relationship and make working cattle so much more fun, and working with horses the same way. I just wanted to briefly cover these 2 points that I don't necessarily have highlighted right here, and that is relevance as a service provider. So many of you out there may not have the opportunity to own a large herd of beef cattle or several horses that you're training and working and developing for other people, but you work for people that do. So your relevance as a service provider can be very, very impactful, and you can become a very significant tool within a company or a large producer's operation if you can have a positive impact on how the horses act, on how the cattle handle, and the overall efficiency of that operation. So this is very relevant not only for folks that own livestock, but for people that have a daily and job significant interactions in these environments. And I think probably over time I have visited with more people that are true service providers than actually horse and cattle owners and raisers on a large scale. So you have a great opportunity to hone these skills and become very relevant in those operations. Now, I always like to state this, now more than ever, we have the opportunity and really the responsibility to be true positive advocates for our industry. The way that we act around our horses, the way that we treat our cattle is very impactful on people that truly don't understand the livestock industry. So many times we're 3 and 4 generations away from actual livestock production. Our neighbors are. And another question I like to ask and get responses, how many of you producers actually live along a public road and have your horses on a public road where people can see them every day and the cattle are on a public road and you see them every day. So your interactions are viewed by people that have video cameras. And so they can kind of misconstrue some things and take a video really quick. And it can either be a positive video that they say, man, this is awesome. I wish I could do that. I wish life was this way. Or if it's a negative environment and we're out there hooting and hollering and chasing that poor calf, and that calf hits that fence and slips through that barbed wire fence and the horse stops and throws us over the fence, that's a negative, right? And that's not something we want to see and want to show. So we have the opportunity to be an advocate. And I would state this, many people are really hesitant to play that advocate role, because they think they're going to have to talk in public and present things to news media or groups at the Rotary Club or the Kiwanis Club. You are so much more impactful with the actions that you dedicate yourself to without you knowing you've ever been seen. So that's all I would ask, is that we always act like somebody's watching us when we're conducting our daily routines. Okay, so this slide's a really neat slide. And it really talks about the first step to managing stress and impacting a positive, low stress environment for the livestock that we work with. And this is a really neat picture. This is a 2-year-old filly. And she's a filly that's really, she's a good filly. You know, she's got a lot of cow horse bred in her, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But truly, that's one of the first things that I like to do whenever I'm starting a young horse that's going to work with cattle. I like for them to learn how to properly maintain a low level of stress and anxiety, because that's directly impacted upon the cattle that we're going to work with. But more importantly, that directly impacts us. If we are nervous when we get on this horse because we think she's going to start crow hopping, or she's going to really want to go and she's going to be pulling that bit, you know, just got that head up and everything, it's going to increase our level of adrenaline, our level of anxiety, our level really of anger by trying to control her because she's not acting right and those cattle are going the wrong way. Well, that all leads to things that are very negative. So one of the things that I like to teach and talk about, you know, people, you know, love to lunge their horses. People love to run circles or go in circles before we go out to the pasture. The theory there is that we're wanting to get the energy out of that horse before we proceed to the task that we have in plan for that day. But it's always been my observation, if we've trained these horses and started them off in a very dedicated way that leads to them understanding that when we put our leg across that saddle and we sit down and we go, we are going to be calm until it's time not to be calm. So we don't want to start out the day before we even get on them, making them run circles with that lunge rope and then hop on them and make, you know, start loping circles in the arena before we go out to work those cattle. We want to walk. We want to go in a slow, defined manner. We want that horse to start out with its head down. You know, you know, level with the withers, and going and observing and looking. And a lot of that comes with our mentality, okay? Because everything that we do is directly impacted upon that horse's behavior, because that horse looks to us for understanding of what to do. So all the 2-year-olds I work with, I try to get them to take the saddle, walk straight out of the barn, go straight to the cattle pasture, and be very calm in walking. So we try to teach that. That's not always possible. Some horses, it takes a lot longer. But that's our ultimate goal and ultimate intent when we're working that, because the first thing is managing that level of stress, first of all, in ourselves, translates to our horse, and then that all translates into the cattle that we're going to work. Now, so cattle handling, you know, so there's different levels of stress that we have to deal with whenever we go and we start working with cattle. But I think if we can look at it and understand the impact of pressure patterns on various classes of livestock, we do a better job. And you'll notice down here, before we talk about the properly trained horse being the key to this process, within the livestock industry, and I think many of you on here that are livestock owners, as a general rule, are probably going to be cow-calf producers, right? Because that's the #1 classification within the state of Tennessee and really overall the Southeast. We have the opportunity to deal with weanlings. Weanlings are stressed. Why? These calves that we've weaned off their mothers, because they've been taken away from their mother. They're now having to fend for themselves. They don't have that comfort level of the cow. So they're stressed already. So how can we manage that stress and deal with it? Stocker cattle are no longer stressed because they don't have their mother. They've learned to find water on their own. They've learned to find the feed bunks and graze on their own. But stockers tend to start developing a hierarchy within that dominance function that we talk about. So there's ways that we handle them differently. Replacement stock, I'm in particularly talking about replacement heifers. So the reproductive process starts. We have estrus, we have standing heats, we have things of that nature that affect different stresses in their lives and how we need to handle them. And one of the most critical areas that I love to use horses on are with our herd sires, because as we all know, testosterone is really built up in these herd sires and they can act silly and can be very dangerous. So the utilization of a horse and managing those properly is a very safe way to do that. And so I've been in the industry for over 30 years now, and I've had the opportunity to work in many different environments, gathering cattle out of 5-acre pastures in Jefferson County, Tennessee, or gathering cattle out of 1,000-acre pastures in outside of Ideal, South Dakota. So I've been there and done that in many, many different environments and many classifications. There's one thing that makes it work more effectively, more efficiently, and in a lower stress environment, and that's the utilization of a horse. Now, as we've progressed through, life and technology, we put people on the moon. We have computers that can think a whole lot quicker than I can. However, there's one thing that was created by the Lord that will never go out of relevance when we're handling livestock, and that's the horse. And I know people don't often do that. We've, in the Southeast, gotten away from that by using four-wheelers and ATVs and things of that nature. But those all bring inherent problems where the horse really alleviates many problems. So we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go forward. So one thing that we really want to start out doing, so some of us may already own horses. Some of us may be looking for a horse, but the first thing that we need to do is to truly recognize the horse's desire to perform. And I can almost guarantee, unless it's a horse that's been around for a long, long time and it's got the age on it and it's just tired, ready to retire, all horses have a desire to perform, and if we take advantage of that, we're going to wind up with a happy horse and a horse that really wants us to give its all. So we have to build on that desire once we recognize it. Now, I will say that it's easier to build on that desire to perform a particular task, and the task that we're talking about now is gathering livestock, sorting livestock, pinning livestock, cutting livestock, loading livestock on trailers, things of that nature. So it's easier if it's inherent or it's genetically bred in those horses. We've all heard about, she's cowie bred or he's a cowie bred horse. He's got cow in his bloodline for all the way through his pedigree. So we hear about that. That's not always true. All horses aren't just natural at it. And I've seen horses that are racing bred, have a tremendous amount of thoroughbred back in that line. They were developing some of these horses that they wanted to be barrel horses or just a lot of the timed event, things where you need a lot of speed and really explosive speed out of out of the box. You know, so some of those horses are very, very easily trained and have a desire to work with cattle. So it's easier though if there's that inherent or that genetic trait built into those, that desire. But even if there's not that desire, if you have a horse that sees a cow from a half a mile away and turns around and rears up and tries to run away, we can still work with those and turn them into a horse that has the ability and the desire to work cattle and be around cattle and be very, very functional in an asset to an agricultural livestock industry. It just takes patience. And that's where that stress level comes in. Really, the stress level that we manage within ourselves begins as we start to train our horse. And then we just work on fine-tuning that desire. And so the only way to truly fine-tune the desire of a cow horse to make them a productive tool within our operation is to get them out in the pasture and utilize them and teach them to understand pressure and release. And these are all key components or concepts for all the people that we listen to on YouTube channels. You know, there's so many different clinicians out there that I truly respect and truly gain a tremendous amount of knowledge from that I put into action. And what do they all talk about? They all talk about pressure and release and how some pressure can say, you know, this is the wrong way, but that release of that pressure gives a reward, right? So those are key concepts in horse training, but those are also key concepts in handling a single individual cow or a herd of cows. But let's look at it this way. When we're talking about fine-tuning that cow horse, we utilize that imposed force, you know, apply and release, right? So we're imposing either the application of force or pressure, or we're imposing the release of that pressure to affect a positive change in our horse's behavior. Now, you've got it backwards if you're utilizing force to change a negative behavior. If you look at it that way, you're always going back to using too much. So if we can look at it as a way to positively affect a change in behavior, we're thinking about it the right way. Okay, we're doing more release than we are pressure or utilization of force. And that just makes for a horse that respects you more instead of fears you. A horse that respects you will protect you. A horse that fears you will be glad to leave you sitting out in a 100-acre pasture and take off back to the barn and make you walk the whole way. And you're just lucky if you didn't break a leg or something. So that's the difference between fear and respect. And that's my ultimate goal in fine-tuning a cow horse, because there's many opportunities you have when you're working in a livestock environment that you have to have a horse that likes you and respects you, because you may be in a 100-acre field and you may get thrown off because a turkey shoots out from under you. The horse didn't mean to throw you. That horse goes into survival mode and you wind up on the ground. Well, you want that horse to hang around so you don't have to walk all the way back. So fear and respect are something that are so key in fine-tuning a horse. Okay, continuing with this fine-tuning of that desire. So if we really want to look at it, the positive changes become responses, right? So we're using that pressure and release, that imposed force, to affect a positive change. Okay, that positive change then becomes a response. And over time, with the patience that we put into a horse, you need to throw your watch away. And you really probably should set your iPhone in the pickup truck and put it on vibrate so you can't even hear it ring. Because with patience, over time, those responses are then patterned into the horse's behavior. So that release that we use, you know, that imposed force becomes in action a reward. So ultimately what we want are those changes to become responses and then become patterned behavior. And when we do that, this is what happens. That pattern behavior can now drive a purpose, a task, a job, or a function. And once we establish that horse understanding its job, it becomes an even happier horse that meets you at the gate because it thinks it's going to go get together a set of cows, sort a set of calves off that set of cows, pen those cows. So we have a horse that truly now can think on its own, can react on its own instead of reacting to us, the rider, and waiting for directive from us. So things happen in real time. And I hope that makes sense. We want to develop horses that enjoy what they do because it's patterned into their behavior. They're having fun doing it, and we're not out there having to pull on their mouths to go right, to go left, to stop, to back up, to move their back in, to do a rollback. They're doing all that on their own. And so what happens is it allows things to happen in real time. It's a natural behavior of the horse that impacts a natural behavior upon the cow, and it's accomplishing the management practice that we want done that day. And so everything tends to be more natural, and with more natural becomes low stress environment. Okay, so the ultimate goal, and you can see this here. Now I'll tell you what, I don't know how many of you know about Lost Creek Cattle Company and the horses that they sired that on their left rear hip have a brand that's a G. And that comes from a son of Play Gun, which they say call Show Me Your Guns. Super, super athletic horses, and ones that you would refer to if y'all understand the lingo, and I'm sure most of you do. They call them quick-footed horses, horses that have a very high level of anxiety naturally when they're young, and over time you work that anxiety into that fine-tuning mode. So this is a horse that really was anxious. Whenever I first started working her, when I got on her and went to the pasture, she had such a desire, the way I trained her, to work, that she just started sweating and just so anxious and so anxious. Well, that resulted in me being a little bit anxious because I didn't want to get thrown off because she got a little too quick or whatever. But over time, me maintaining my calm demeanor and working with her and allowing her the opportunity to learn to react on her own and become comfortable, it truly leads to a content, safe, and very useful horse. Now, I would say that if you're a person that just likes to trail ride, this type of horse would never be a content, safe, and useful horse, because a horse like this truly needs a high energy, a high impact, very, very difficult and complex job. So this is the horse that I actually used to sort baby calves, weanlings, from their mothers when we're doing research projects. Then I take these cattle to the pens. I use her to sort bulls and to load. So she's always thinking on her own now, and she is so relaxed. Okay, she is now a 6-year-old. It took about 2.5 years to get her to that point, but she is truly a content, very safe, and probably one of the best cow horses that I've ever ridden in my life. And I'd put her up against any other horse out there. But it didn't start that way. There was an inherent level of anxiety bred into her because of her genetics. She did have cow sense, but she just needed to learn how to control it. And the only way we can teach our horses to maintain their level of stress is by utilizing and controlling our level of stress. And then that combination is implied upon the cattle that we handle. Okay, so moving on, fine-tuning that cow horse, your ability to remain persistently calm. Constant force will never correctly pattern a horse. We talked about that just a little bit early. If we're always gruff, always trying to correct things, and never releasing that pressure, we're never going to positively pattern that horse. So, getting the horse out and using them. So I hope you guys can see this. Somebody raise their hand if they can see that this is a brand new first calf heifer licking off her first baby. Very good. So we've raised our hands. So a lot of what happens is once we get that horse to understand, to try to be calm, then we have to start introducing that cow horse into the real world, the things that it's going to see. And I will state this, there's probably nothing more scary for a green horse than a first calf heifer that loves her baby calf to death, and there's that little black thing laying in the ground, and all of a sudden it starts shaking its head and it starts trying to get up. So there's different visual things that that horse has to learn to overcome. So if you're listening to Craig Cameron or some of these other clinicians, what's one of the things that they typically talk about a lot? That's desensitization, right? Well, we can do that with a flag in a round pen all day long, and we can get them to where we can swat that flag over their ears and under their belly and behind them, and they just sit there and go to sleep. But you can take that same horse out there and you can walk up to that first calf heifer or that cow that's got that baby calf. You can hop off that horse and you can go put a tag in that calf's ear so you can identify it. That calf starts bawling, that cow starts getting mean, and you look up, where's your horse? If you haven't properly patterned them, taken off back to the barn, okay? Or if you're riding up on a newborn calf like that, that horse is going to put its head down, it's going to blow. You know, it's going to see what world's going on, and that calf's going to move, and that horse is going to be scared. So we have to really pattern and desensitize in a real world environment. And there's no substitute for that in a round pen that actually comes out in the field. And so the thing that we're really going to talk about today as it relates to cattle handling is what's number one in the state of Tennessee, and that's cow-calf operations. So there's several different things that we could talk about, but due to time, and over time, I hope we can cover a lot of these different topics. But basically, we're going to be talking about forced and encouraged movement. And that's really the most stressful time, I think, for all producers out there. And I would state this, that if you're a beef cattle producer, you're more likely to take advantages of programs that can positively impact your economic bottom line if you truly enjoy working your cattle. If you don't enjoy working your cattle, you're not going to do things like pregnancy checks that can identify those lowly productive cows. You're not going to do vaccination programs that increase the immune response and make for healthier, better growing cattle. You're not going to participate in artificial insemination programs. There's so many things that you can do if you enjoy working with your cattle. And if you don't enjoy working with them, you're going to get them up as little as possible. And the first and foremost thing about not wanting to work our cattle is getting them up. Okay, cattle are grazers. They love being out on pasture. They don't necessarily want to walk to the barn. But if we can pattern our cattle, pattern our horses, and do it in a low-stress manner, it becomes enjoyable. And we have better family dynamics because we're not getting mad at our spouses or our fiancés or girlfriends or our children. So let's kind of move forward here pretty quickly. I think I'm getting closer on time. And so the first step, we want to treat our herd of cattle just like it's one individual, okay? So think about that. So, and we're going to be talking about pasture gathering. So the first step in really starting a low-stress management program for our horses and our beef cattle is really very simple, and it's so very enjoyable. So you as a horse person will probably enjoy this aspect more than any other thing. And I would state that you offer your services to your neighbors that are cattle owners if you're not a cattle owner, and start developing some of these skills. But pasture interaction throughout the year is probably one of the most critical and most crucial things that we can do to impact positively that additive nature of cattle. So if they're used to seeing us in the field with them while they're grazing, and we're not expecting them to move or do anything, we're just riding among them, they're going to become more comfortable with us. And I would state this, initially they're going to walk away. And the reason that is, it's just natural animal instinct. Those cows don't necessarily view the horse as a horse. They don't know what a horse is. What they know is it's a larger four-legged animal than they are. So that's a perceived advantage in dominance, okay? They're assuming that larger animal sits a little bit higher up on that hierarchy platform than they do. So if you can be in that pasture and just allow them to become comfortable with you, then that's going to make your future actions when you start gathering those cattle so much more easy and impactful and efficient. So I encourage producers to do this at least 3 to 4 times a week without expecting their cattle to do anything. And if you can be a service provider to a rancher or a cattle owner and provide that service and to say, hey, I want to help you whenever you gather your cattle, we can do this in a very easy way. And they give you permission to go out there and just be present in those cattle without expecting you or expecting them to do anything. So that's the first step, pasture interaction on a daily basis. We have to look at our infrastructure. So if you're really not familiar with a certain location, you need to ride through before you even start gathering the cattle. So what I like to do, and I like to go do demonstrations and show up for the first time. I don't like to cheat. I don't like to show up two weeks ahead of time and develop a plan and have time to think about it. I like to show up that morning, ride through one time to see where all the gates are, how all the fences are and things of that nature, where all the ditches and the gullies and the ponds are, in the forested areas and things of that nature that can act as draws. So really become familiar with the environment and understand that the way that the infrastructure is designed can be an asset or can be a huge negative to managing cattle in a low stress way. So where gates are located, are they located in the center of a fence? That's the wrong place, right? Cattle inherently like 3 points of pressure. Well, that means that if we can have gates located in the corner, each of those fences can be a point of pressure, and we as the handler behind is that third point of pressure to drive them to that, and then they can go out the gate because that opens up and releases that pressure on those cattle. Natural passive movement. If we can design our facility or if we can identify places where there are actually existing cow paths, that's where the cattle are going to want to go. So we need to anticipate that whenever we're working them. We want to avoid creeks, ditches, gullies, thickets, because those are all draws. And cows are smart. Cows are a lot smarter than people give them credit for, because they know that if you're on a four-wheeler or if you're on foot, you're not going to want to cross a creek. You're not going to go stand in the middle of a pond, which if you're trying to get a bull up that's a little ornery, he's going to go straight to the pond and he's going to go out in the middle of it. He's going to turn around and look at you. And if he could stick his tongue out at you, he would. So those are draws. Those are negative draws that we need to avoid when we begin the movement of those cattle. Take them away from there. But I would state this: if we handle cattle in a low stress way and we walk those cattle, it is easy to maneuver them around those negative draws like creeks, ditches, thickets, and things of that nature. So they act as draws, but we need to, through low stress management movement, control them away from those areas. So as we talk about gathering cattle and moving cattle, encouraging that movement, the first thing that we truly need to do is assemble that herd, okay? And before attempting anything towards moving to those pens, the first thing is to get that set of cows as a herd, because they have herd instinct. And if we try to take two different groups at two different times, they're going to cause and act against each other. If we try to take three different groups, they're going to act against each other. So we just need to really gather that herd together as one unit. And then when we do that, we can actually treat that herd of cows as one cow. So let's think about this. And I know you folks that primarily deal with horses and training horses, there's a pivot point on a horse, right? And that typically is the shoulder, okay? So we move in front of the shoulder, we can stop that horse and get him to turn or stop or slow him down. If we move behind that shoulder, we get that horse to move away from us, okay? Well, it's the same thing with really all animals. It just depends on how fast that animal is and what that animal's flight zone is. But with one single cow, that shoulder is the critical pivot point back and forth, okay? And it's how we place ourselves as the animal in front, behind, or adjacent to that pivot point. So once we gather that herd of cows as one unit, then we can identify where that shoulder, that pivot point is within that herd, and it makes it so very easy to control that herd. So it's the same movement principles with one as it is with many. So always remember that and think of it that way. Don't just concentrate on each and every individual cow in there, and we see one running off here and one running off there. We don't have time to go worry about the individual. If we think about the whole, the individuals are going to maintain themselves within close proximity to that herd. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit later on in the next two presentations, but I want you to be thinking about the 3 points of pressure principle. And that's something that I just kind of developed on my own. That's something that I teach, and it's something I think that's extremely impactful. If we can always maintain 3 points of pressure upon that herd of cattle, we can control them and we can maintain them at a walk. And that's probably the most important thing that we can do is whenever we're going from the pasture, whether it's a 1,000-acre pasture out in South or North Dakota, or it's a 25-acre pasture in Hamblin County, Tennessee, or it's a 50-acre pasture here on the Middle Tennessee Research and Education Center, if we can maintain that herd at a walking pace, we can control their stress level and we can control where they want to go. And we can make this a very fun event. So I want you to notice this. Now this is really going on beyond 3 points of pressure, but I want you to notice something here. I have two gentlemen in the back, that would be Matt Backus and Wes Gillum, riding two horses, providing that rear point of pressure. But really what I want this to show is something very critical to handling cattle in reducing stress. And that's the fence on each side of these cattle. If you have good quality fences on your operation, you have begun the process of low stress cattle handling. If you have fences that have holes in them and the cattle know that, they're always going to be stressed trying to find those holes. If they know it's a solid, contained fence, they're not even going to worry about it. They're not going to try to get out. They're not going to try to rub up against it. They're not going to try to look for those holes. Another stressor here is being able to maintain the cattle at a walk. These cattle came out of a pasture. They hit a public road. So for safety first, I'm in front to offset some cars that may come, but it's also keeping these cattle grouped as a herd, because as you know, if you've got 3 points of pressure, one on each side and behind, they may want to take off running, not because they're scared, but because, hey, we're going to get away. So what I'm doing in front with that phone over my shoulder is just maintaining them at a steady walk. And that's so very important. Next concept that I want to talk about in terms of movement patterns is there's different ways to move cattle, and that varies across all classes. However, as a general rule, the most effective way to achieve movement in a way that we desire cattle to go, but also allows them to maintain their normal, natural way, is to move in something that's natural. And I like to call that the hierarchy of cattle movement. So there's a hierarchy in every herd of cattle that you have. And so I want you to remember this. And I want you to watch this as you move cattle. The most dominant cattle in the herd stay where? They stay in the middle. Why is that? It's just natural for them to want to be protected, because the grizzly bears are going to be hiding in the pine trees and get the first ones that come to them, right? Okay, then the mountain lions are going to be able to come up and sneak up behind and get those behind, right? So the grizzly bear is full now. He's had his meal. Mountain lion's full now. He's had his meal. Then that dominant cow is right there in the middle, and she's fine. That's natural instinct. Those tend to be able to impose their will on those that inherently are less dominant. Less dominant up front, less dominant in the rear, most dominant in the center. If we can maintain that natural way of movement without distorting that, you're going to maintain a walk, and it's going to be more natural for them. And it's really going to facilitate itself. That movement is going to facilitate itself, and we're just using ourselves in those 3 points of direction. Now, those 3 points of pressure, we always want one of them to be a fixed point, like a fence, okay? Taking that group of cattle up the fence, and I'm going to show this right now. Okay, the second point of pressure, we want to be that person working these cattle from the side, keeping them moving, keeping those front less dominant cattle moving so that the more dominant cattle don't start butting them, and keep those rear cattle moving. And then that third point of pressure is back here at the back, keeping these less dominant cattle moving. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, I use feed to gather my cattle. Well, we distort that natural hierarchy of movement because those most dominant cattle do tend to like to get the most feed, right? So they're going to begin pushing themselves through those less dominant cattle, and that really messes things up and really makes for chaos, especially when we become to that critical point that you can see up here, and that's a gate opening that we want them to go out. They tend to bunch up and cause trouble and then turn and try to get back by us. So that's so important to truly understand. Moving these cattle from the side, keeping them strung out. Now, what's one way to really understand that cattle do like to move in single file or double file or triple file patterns? Cow paths, right? We can see 1, 2, and 3 cow paths located side by side. So they don't like to be moved as one whole constant group. They like to string out and form that hierarchy. Now, moving on fairly quickly, we have safety. Safety becomes even more critical as we begin to move our cattle from those large pastures into more confined areas for these management practices that we're going to incorporate. So the most critical thing that we understand as a handler of cattle is how many cattle can actually fit into these facilities that we're taking. And then the handler, which is on the horse, is positioning is the most critical and most impactful in terms of movement of these cattle and getting them to go where we want them to go. And it's way more impactful than any type of force or noise that we can impart upon these cattle. Just our presence and positioning in a very quiet manner, okay? You hear people hollering and yelling all the time. Whenever I'm teaching how to move cattle, sort cattle, and pin cattle, the only thing I ever do is a directed whistle. And that's something like that. And I teach people you need to learn to whistle if you're going to be a true stockman or stock person, because that whistle is actually something that does not distract the cattle. It's something that is not confusing to them because it's really 1 or 2 notes. It's not hollering and causing a lot of confusion. It's more of a directed thing that impulses them to move forward. So something like that. Mostly it's positioning and a little slight whistle. And always remember that level of injury increases as we move cattle closer to confinement. That's why it's important that we utilize proper horsemanship and stockmanship so that we can continue to enjoy what we're doing and be safe. So I just want you to show you some examples of why it's important that we match the number of cattle to the system with which we're going to take these cattle through for the processing, the management practices that we have. If we take too many cattle, we're going to increase that stress level because we're messing with that hierarchy and we're also applying too much pressure. So just a brief video here to look at some steers that are in a stocker research that we've done here. We know that our system will hold 4 to 6 cattle. What I tend to like to do is only take 5. So you can see I sorted the 5th one off. And then we're just using that horse to apply some gentle pressure to these cattle. You'll notice I'm not hollering, I'm only whistling, and I am not running to try to force them too fast because they have to think and they have to react as well. The cattle do. And these cattle hadn't been through this chute a lot. And you can see that I'm only providing steady proportioned pressure. I'm not providing a lot of pressure. And then we look up through there and they went in there very, very calmly and gently. Now, if I took 10 and ran up behind them, I guarantee you that 6 of those 10 would have tried to get back by me and would have been at a higher level of stress. So it's so important in the number that we take. Now that was steers. This is a set of bulls. So this is a little different class of cattle, and why it's, in my opinion, more important to utilize the horse here, because bulls have testosterone. Testosterone tends to breed aggression. And so we have to provide that dominant individual, which is the horse, but also understand that they will only go to where they're not crowded. And you see how easy that was to load a set of bulls that can be very, very rambunctious. If we provide pressure and release in really low stress type environment to work these cattle, because all it takes is a hot stick or a whip or hollering to get these bulls agitated, and I guarantee you they would turn on that horse and start butting at that horse if this was not a low stress type environment. And that's a negative. You know, that's a negative as an advocate if we have people there watching something that's negative. Facility noise. We talk about getting our horses adjusted and desensitized, and the way to truly do that is to be impactful or carry out this process in a real world environment. You know, that flag in the round pen can only go so far. But when we have people doing 32 different things and we're bringing cattle to them, and we've got this ultrasound machine that's got this big screen, and we've got veterinarians talking and things of that nature, not only are we impacting the stress on our horse, but also on the cattle. So we always need to be careful and have things or have our horses around stuff like this so that they do maintain a level of low stress. Now, positioning is so critical. Positioning is more impactful, as we mentioned earlier, than anything that we can do. It's way more impactful than force and noise and hollering. Very little is ever accomplished whenever you're working cattle with paddles, whips, or sticks to encourage desired directional movement within crowding areas. So many people utilize those as crutches, you know, and so what that allows is if you start getting angry and you've got a paddle in your hand or a whip or a stick in your hand, what are you going to do? You're going to take that aggression out on the cattle, right? Well, the only thing that's going to do is to increase their stress level, and they are bigger than you, and they are going to try to hurt you, or they're going to hurt themselves trying to get away. So you've really done nothing by carrying a paddle, a whip, or a stick into an opportunity to work cattle. It's actually your position as a handler on that horse that provides the direction identified that these cattle need to go. And the same goes for over vocalizing. Please just whistle. A good whistle is all it takes, and that can't be one of those loud, funny whistles. It just needs to be kind of a one note, maybe two note whistle that provides just a singular direction and force. So the results of proper cattle handling, we talked a lot about it today, but I think the big thing is safety. Safety to the cattle that we're working and safety to us as we are the handlers. And that means the 5-year-old kids that we've got out there learning this process at a young age, and our 75-year-old folks out there working alongside us, teaching us with the wisdom that they've gained over a lifetime. Safety is so critical. It's so critical also for the livestock that we're working with, because they are providing us with an income. So we have a genuine concern for their welfare. And so that provides us the opportunity to also demonstrate our advocacy and our care for the livestock that we have, and producing a safe a source of protein for the public that we're out here working for. It impacts nutrition. You know, cattle that are stressed don't gain as well. It impacts their health. Cattle that are stressed, just like us as humans, whenever we're truly stressed, our immune system drops and we get a cold. A cold turns into pneumonia. Pneumonia, it turns it into a hospital visit. And all of it was really based on stress. Reproduction is so important, probably the most economically important trait in the livestock industry, whether we're looking at the horse industry or the cattle industry, the sheep industry, or whatever it is. Stress has a negative impact on reproduction, which obviously would reduce our ability to be is effective economically in our program. That added behavior. Every time that we have a good, positive working experience with our cattle, that means they're going to work better next time. And that means our family's going to want to continue working cattle with us, and we're going to want to be involved in more management programs. If we go out there and we have a bad day and we really start hollering and whipping our cattle, they're going to remember that next time, and it's going to be harder to work with them. It's going to be harder to talk our cousin into coming over and helping us because we acted like a total knucklehead and they don't want to be any part of that. So let's always remember additive behavior. Let's do that in a positive way, and it's going to make it easier and easier and more enjoyable every time we have the opportunity to work our cattle. Service provider. Many of you out there can become a service provider to your neighbors or to some type of industry. If you're a field person or something of that nature, if you're a veterinarian, if you're a vet tech, you can be a great asset to some of these larger and smaller beef cattle operations by incorporating some of the things that you can learn from low stress handling into their operations. And if you can become part of a producer's operation, they're going to call you time and again, and it's only going to make the relationship better. And they're going to rely on you and confide in you. And always remember that the things that we do are being watched. Most of us live on public roads now. Most of us have people watching. So let's always just remember to be very careful and considerate of the things that we're doing. I just want to kind of show this. This is a set of cattle that's very content. And I know that some of the video may be a little jumpy out there, and I apologize for that. But these cattle went through an estrus synchronization program. We got the cattle up. We sorted the calves off of the cows. We ran the cows through the chute. We put in a cedar. It's an easy breed cedar. It's a progesterone impregnated vaginal cedar. You see those blue strings hanging out. So that makes these cattle think like they're pregnant, so that in 9 days we can inseminate these cows after that artificially and enhance the genetics that we have. So it wasn't, we could have made this a very, very stressful act doing all of this and putting that cedar into these. And they get a shot also of gonadotropin releasing hormone and sorting the calves from them. But I want you, do these cows look stressed to you? So I don't know if you can see it really well because of the jumpiness of your screen, but there are at least 8 cows that pass through this that are actually chewing their cud. So one of the signs of a very content cow that feels very safe and not threatened is that she's chewing her cud. And that's what cows tend to do. They're grazers. They go out and graze all day. They're standing and they're watching their backs and their fronts and their sides. And then whenever they feel comfortable, they go lay down. They'll regurgitate and remasticate or re-chew that forage that they consumed earlier that day and begin the digestion process. So if you've got a set of cows that you're riding a horse through that's chewing their cud, not trying to get away from you, got their heads down and relaxing, you know you've done a good job that day in a low stress type environment. Well, this is that same set of cows. They're walking back to the pasture now. So the key word is what? They're walking back to the pasture. They don't feel threatened by us. They don't feel any negative impact through going through that management procedure. They're just slowly, relaxingly going back to the pasture with which they're housed in. So to me, that makes me feel better as a stockman and a handler of these cattle to know that they're very comfortable with me and they're very relaxed after a pretty significant management practice. So I'll take this opportunity to go ahead and answer any questions that you might have. I truly appreciate the opportunity to visit with you today, and certainly want to offer you the opportunity to get out here in real life and real person whenever things get open back up. And I want you to kind of be excited about the next two handling seminars that we have. They're actually going to be a drone footage of us actually gathering cattle out of pastures and then sorting cattle. So it's going to be some movements associated that we need to teach our horse and have our horse to to become comfortable with. And it also teaches us how to approach and gather those herds and how to pressure and release so that we're not causing mix-ups in that hierarchy we called about. And then some pretty neat sorting work in a more confined area. All right, so do we have any questions? I'm gonna let Jenny take over here.
Sorry, I was having some technical difficulties here.
Hey, that's all right.
But thank you so much, Kevin. That was great. And it's just full of really wonderful information about, how to manage a lot of this and manage some low stress techniques, manage our horses and manage cattle and really lay that foundation. We'll leave it open if there's any questions. Look, we have one here. So I know you're a cattle worker, but when talking about calming the horse down or starting at a walk so it won't go too fast, could that work with a hunter jumper as well, or even some other breeds? Would you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely, I would love to. Do I need to hit that answer live button, or can everybody hear me?
You're good. I took care of it for you.
Okay, so I do know, and I have ridden some hunter jumpers, and I've ridden some horses that have a true a high level of energy, and so I'm going to say yes, I would do this the same way. It's not going to happen overnight. Just like I talked to you, the red roan. Do you recall seeing the red roan that I spoke about earlier in the video? I would truly equate that to the attitude, the energy level of a hunter jumper. So it didn't happen overnight, but the way that you can make that happen is you start fine-tuning that cow work type situation. And I would state this: horses are so intelligent, and you as equestrians know this probably more than I do. I have the opportunity to work with horses, but the way that I like to work with horses is with cattle all the time. And so I don't do a lot of other things except for work cattle. That's just my passion. But horses can learn to adjust their energy level and their anxiety level and their willingness and understanding of how to perform, as long as we, through our actions, pattern them in that environment. So in that hunter jumper, if you can slowly start teaching him or her that whenever we go work with cattle, we approach it in a slower manner. And that all starts with how we leave the barn. And now it's not going to happen overnight, as you know. You as horse folks know that you throw those watches away, and you really, sometimes you throw that calendar away. But through repetitive action, it becomes pattern. And so yes, it is very much possible. I've done that with other horses like that, but I would invite you to come. I wish you would have been around whenever I started training. This is a horse I call Fritz. It's turned into the best cow horse I've ever ridden in my life. But you would have thought she was on some kind of illegal drug when I first started her.
And Kevin, I'm going to add on to that too. My background is event riding and dressage. And so, kind of having a different approach and not really having worked around cattle, a lot of these principles I think are really synonymous across the board, no matter what discipline you ride.
Yeah.
And I think too, just like we see and Kevin mentioned throughout this, a lot of it is almost repatterning the operator and making sure that, I'm coming at it maybe from a different perspective that allows me to be able to take that breath and say, okay, this is going to be different. I'm going to take the time it takes to make these things happen. And we even encourage people sometimes to change up the way in which maybe you groom, so that the horse starts to realize that this might be something different than every single way that you've done it in the past. So pick a new end of the barn to tie to and get ready to go on, or maybe go out and take that horse out for a little bit of a graze, before you go and tack up. And so changing that schedule can also help that repatterning and help to create a more positive experience that hopefully will help to calm that horse down a little bit. And then putting my nutrition hat on just for a second, from a dietary perspective, we can also look at some of those pieces and hopefully make sure that we're not amplifying that stress maybe due to some dietary interventions, and making sure that we've got a good quality, diet behind that horse that's really balanced and based on the way that that GI tract should work appropriately.
Absolutely. Another thing too, if you don't mind me adding that is, so once you start working, in the different environments, whether it's the show ring, okay, so that horse knows how to act in the show ring already. But once we start patterning that animal in the working environment, the livestock working environment around cattle, so you're going from something that's more inanimate objects within that show arena to something that's truly becomes very, very natural to that horse once it becomes used to it and working with other animals that are walking around on four legs and trees and pasture and fences and things of that nature. So patterning yourself to act one way within that show ring, and then also you calming yourself to really working within a more natural, more calming environment can help that horse understand that. Plus, it never hurts to throw a 50-pound Circle Y a saddle on top of a hunter jumper. That might slow him down a little bit. I don't know.
So Kevin, one of the questions that I know you and I have talked about a lot is, how do you really go about maybe starting something new, or maybe diversifying that horse out of one job and starting it in another, especially for those riders that might not be as comfortable on horseback or might be a little bit timid about, a fall or a bad accident that may have happened in the past?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So a lot of what I talk about is and I don't like, and this is just my preference. Okay, so I'm going to approach it from this standpoint. I don't like to work a whole lot in the round pen or in confined areas because that's not where I'm going to be working most. I'm going to be working most out in open pastures. And there's probably no more dangerous place if we don't approach it right than an open pasture for a young horse, introducing them to those new things that Jenny asked about. But those are things that you have to overcome. So you have to face them if you're going to wind up with that content, that safe horse, that usable horse for you. So whenever we're introducing that horse to new things, doing that desensitization that we talked about, you saw that first calf heifer licking that calf off. Well, I actually had that red roan pinned right next to that, so that it actually saw that and witnessed that by being a board fence away. So it got used to that, so that it was more used to that when we went out into the pasture. One of the first things that I do after I feel comfortable, if I've started a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, if I'm comfortable, I want to get them out into a very small pasture that has cows in it the first time. And then I want to just start following those cows. I don't want to do anything but follow them around. And then all of a sudden, you're going to start noticing that that horse wants to follow those cattle. And then I will move away and walk in front, around and in front of those cattle to get those cattle to stop and to turn. Then it understands and wants to do that. Then the next thing that I want to do, and it's not to cause stress, but I want the horse to understand that when the cattle start running, they don't have to. Because that's the biggest thing that most people make a mistake is they don't gain that control of their horse. And when that horse sees a group of cattle take off running, for some reason it tends to spook them because they think those cattle saw that grizzly bear that we talked about earlier and they're running. So how do you survive a grizzly bear attack? You outrun the people that you're with, right? Well, that horse is going to want to outrun those cattle. So we get that animal used to seeing cows running because we're going to have to learn to remove pressure and ride around to slow down cattle. So we need to be able to control our horse to do that. So the way that we do that, Dr. Ivy, that I like to do that is to be in as real world of an environment that we can, but make it a micro environment, something that if that horse does get spooked, it can't go far. If that horse for some reason threw us off, it's not going to get scared and keep running. It's going to be there where we can walk up and we can catch it. And what I would say is if you wind up getting de-seated, which You know, I'm not embarrassed to admit I've been de-seated a whole lot. Actually, I like to get de-seated. That way I know what kind of horse I've got, one that's going to hang around or one that's going to leave. But if you've got a smaller environment and you do get de-seated, which I don't recommend, it gives you the opportunity to go up and to catch that horse. And when you catch that horse, never be negative. Never jerk on that lead. Never holler at that horse, because that horse is not going to remember that he caught me. He's going to remember that he hollered at me when he caught me, and that's going to wind up it. But do things in a micro environment, just to give the horse the opportunity to succeed. And as soon as that success comes in a small environment, it comes natural to want to succeed in that larger open pasture environment.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. I think most of you have had a chance to complete our evaluation poll, so thank you so much. If you haven't clicked through those, please do so, and then we'll end it here. As a reminder, next week at the same time, next Tuesday, the 16th, we're going to be moving through now how to handle and maneuver on horseback and talking about how to move the horse's body to make that effective. And so Kevin and some others through the station have taken some really great aerial footage to help showcase a lot of the information that Kevin's talked about today. And so we're excited to share that with you. We also recorded the session today, so we'll be able to post that for you shortly at our YouTube channel. And we shortened the URL so that way you can access it through that abbreviated version, which will also be posted at our website, uthorse.com, or also at our Facebook page at the Horse Programs of Tennessee. And so please make sure to share this with your friends and anyone else that you might think could be interested in the information. And thanks so much, Kevin. We'll give you kind of a virtual round of applause and hope to see you all next week.
All right. Thank you all very much. See you next week.